Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for May 23rd, 2023. The former MI6 director, Sir Richard Dearlove, spoke glowingly of the positive contribution of war to maintain cohesion and motivation for the United Kingdom. In an address he delivered to the UK National Conservatism Conference last week, Dearlove said that since the end of the Cold War, quote, "It seems that we have lost our way. Without the essential threat to our way of life that was a constant feature of the Cold War, we have lost cohesion and motivation, and especially our self-confidence," unquote. Looking back over time, he said, quote, "It never occurred to me that I was not on the side of the angels," unquote. The cause of complacency today he attributed to the amplification of minority views by social media, which allow, quote, "mainline political and social debate to become seriously distorted by fringe movements," unquote. Now, does he mean by fringe movements those who opposed war conducted by imperial predators? Does he include as fringe movements those who are opposed to the delivery of weapons to Ukraine on the borders of Russia, which threatened to plunge the world into nuclear war? Is that what he means by fringe political movements? Well, yes, that's exactly what he means. He described those who ignore, quote, "the peace conditions laid down by President Zelensky," unquote, that they are, quote, "doing the work of our foremost enemies," unquote. And after saying that, he was met with a standing ovation, a round of applause for that statement. Then he concluded by saying that the ultimate goal of the war must be, quote, "nothing less than revolutionary change in Russia," unquote, which obviously is a code word for regime change, the removal of Putin and the breakup of Russia into a small group of competing smaller nations. Now, Dearlove, who perhaps should be called Strangelove, was the head of MI6 from 1999 to 2004. Now, during that time, he provided the dossier to the Bush administration, which claimed to prove that Iraq was developing weapons of mass destruction. This dossier was delivered to George Tenet, then CIA director, given to Colin Powell, and presented at the United Nations to justify the regime change war against Iraq. Dearlove was at the center of that in the coordination of what was called the dodgy dossier, that was the Blair regime's contribution to regime change war in Iraq. Now, also, don't forget, Dearlove was someone who vouched for the fraudulent dossier compiled by his former subordinate, Christopher Steele, former MI6 agent Christopher Steele, which his vouching was used to promote the now discredited Steele dossier, which provided the basis for the FBI investigation into Russiagate, which claimed that Putin was working with Donald Trump to ensure Trump's election in 2016. So Dearlove, from the Iraq War through the Russiagate, through now the Ukraine War, has been one of the most ardent spokesmen for war and dismemberment of Russia and for keeping the United States from any possibility of peace with Russia. Now, note as well that the FBI was obliterated by the findings of Special Counsel Durham, who concluded that the FBI had no legitimate basis for the investigation that they launched against Donald Trump, which was the basis of a 4-year witch hunt against the president, run by corrupt networks in the FBI in full coordination with the Obama networks in intelligence, the Clinton campaign, and of course the US media. And before the Durham report came out, this was confirmed in an extraordinary 24,000-word dossier compiled by Jeff Gerth, a former New York Times investigative reporter, which was published by the Columbia Journalism Review, which concluded the same thing, that there was illegal cooperation between the Obama intelligence community, the Clinton campaign, and the US media. The only thing that Durham and Girth left out was the role of GCHQ, the British National Security Agency, in triggering the initial Russiagate investigation when GCHQ delivered the story to John Brennan, then CIA director, that they had picked up evidence of Russian interference in the US election. And then this became the basis for the Steele report. So here you have an absolute proof of the corruption in shaping the narrative, which was designed to convince the American people that the Trump election was run by Putin and that Russia is an enemy of the United States. There's no possibility for friendly relations, and therefore it's justified to provide weapons to Ukraine to conduct a NATO war against Russia in Ukraine. Now, as for the war that Dearlove wants to have to provide cohesion, there were some developments in the last couple of days. I reported yesterday on the G7 agreement to train Ukrainian fighter pilots to use F-16s. Their deliberation was occurring precisely at the moment that it was announced of the fall of Bakhmut, where the Ukrainians were trying to make a last stand to demonstrate their commitment to the war against Russia so they could continue to get weapons deliveries, in which they deliberately sacrificed tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers to hold a piece of land. And it was done for a public relations stunt. That's the nature of the Zelensky regime. That's the nature of the NATO-US policy, to sacrifice Ukrainians, as we've said from the outset, for a proxy war to bring down Russia. Now, today, the European Union defense ministers are meeting. They'll be discussing the deliveries of the F-16s. It's still not 100% certain they'll be able to deliver them, or there's an agreement to deliver them. They'll have to do some training. But it was pointed out by the Russian ambassador to the United States, Antonov, that Ukraine lacks the infrastructure for deploying F-16s and for repairing them, and this will have to be done at NATO bases. And he asks, will they fly from NATO bases? Will they be piloted by NATO pilots? Will they be guided by NATO technology? If so, Antonov's point is that makes NATO directly a party to the war. It's no longer a proxy war, but NATO is directly engaging in war with Russia, and there will be a response to that. Now then, on June 12th, NATO will begin its largest ever exercises in what's called Air Defender 2023. And as many have pointed out, the danger of an accident or a deliberate crash in airspace could trigger new conflict. Now, finally, there are reports of more Ukrainian shelling at positions inside Russia, which is something Biden promised would not happen. Well, clearly Zelensky is not really under control. The Ukrainian army is moving in ways of desperation, especially after the fall of Bakhmut. They're trying to convince the West that the counteroffensive will work. Give us more money, give us more weapons, give us more time. And in the meantime, there are more dead Ukrainians and dead Russians as a result. So the EU-NATO partnership in war was consolidated on January 10th, 2023, and signed by leaders of the two groups, that what they called the Third Joint Declaration of NATO-EU Cooperation, signed by Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, who's on his way out, by the way, Charles Michel, the president of the European Council, and Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission. This communique stated, quote, "We are determined to take partnership between NATO and the EU to the next level," unquote, to war, to full-scale war. If you live in the EU or NATO countries or in the US, this is a direct threat to your future. I'd encourage you to join us to take the power out of the hands of these war hawks. Read the urgent appeal from Helga Zepp-LaRouche that's appended at the description box of this update. Sign it and circulate it. Your future and probably your life depends on defeating this war machine and the likes of Sir Richard Dearlove. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back again tomorrow. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.